Hello, beautiful humans. Welcome to the Midlife Revolution podcast. I am your host, Megan Connor, and I'm joined today by the wonderful, inimitable Randy Watts.
The Randy C. Watts. Thank you, Megan.
That's right.
Always a pleasure.
I love having Randy on the show. And so, for those of you who have watched my show before, you'll recognize Randy. We've done at least 3 episodes with him in the past. He is the former Disney detective. He also was a good friend of Alex Cox back before he was involved with his sister in murderous dealings. And what was the other show we did? Oh, we did one about you leaving the church.
Yeah, we've done a
The
few.
LDS Church. Yeah, we've
Sure.
done several discussions. And no matter what it is that we're talking about, Randy, my listeners just absolutely rave about how wonderful you are and always ask me to have you back on. So here we are having you back on once again.
Well, I love your listeners. Bless their hearts.
They are a group of beautiful humans. So today we're going to talk about a topic that maybe a lot of people don't really want to talk about, but during our first discussion, you had mentioned your work in the funeral industry, and I found that fascinating. I think a lot of our listeners appreciated what you had to say, and we decided to have a discussion about grief. And grief is one of those topics I think a lot of people, as I said, are reluctant to address. But for me, acknowledging grief has been one of the most healing things for me in the past several years. And so I wanted to invite you on to have a conversation about how grief is actually a good thing.
Well, thank you. It's one of those things that not only have I researched, I've experienced. I have a TikTok channel, Randy Knows Grief. And I don't know, it's one of those things that everybody has to go through. I've lost my mother, my adoptive mother, my father, my adoptive father. Um, I've lost two brothers in law. I've lost a sister. I've lost my best friend. But uh, what hit me the hardest was when my wife got leukemia. And she passed away 6 months after the diagnosis.
Hmm.
Um, you know, Grief is one of those things that we 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 can give great advice and we can suggest things for people to do, but if you haven't experienced true grief, you just don't understand.
Um, I have a list of prepared questions, but I always feel like prepared questions feel a little stiff. I really like doing the organic type of interview. But
Absolutely.
you you have a long list of people who you've lost in your life, and I certainly do as well. My grandparents all died when I was very young, except for my maternal grandmother, and so I feel like I started out with a lot of grief in my life, and I think what's important to note is that the reason that we feel grief is because we had so much love in our heart for those people. And that's what I always think is good about grief, is that I remind myself that grief teaches me what was important to me and what I loved and what I cared about. And I don't know if you have similar thoughts or feelings on that.
Absolutely. I kind of wrote the book on grief, literally. My book, Feeling Empty, is about grief. And in that book, I say that grief is the price we pay for love.
Hmm.
The more that we've loved, the more we're going to grieve. When I lost my wife, Melinda, um, as she was in the hospital, I literally moved into the hospital with her. When she was diagnosed with leukemia, I literally lived in the hospital, and the nurses were so accommodating. But I'd set up a little bed beside her, and for 6 months, I was at her side. And I always thought if she passed away, I didn't think she was gonna. I thought she was gonna get better. But I thought in the back of my mind, if she passed away, that would really be sad, especially the funeral part. And that's about the extent that I went to in my mind.
Mm,
However, when she passed away, I had no idea that it was going to hit me like a freight train. The funeral part was easy. I thought
yeah.
closing the casket, seeing her lying there and closing the casket was going to be the toughest part. But compared to what I felt a couple days later, and for the next 2, 3 years, I I had no idea that grief was going to hit me that hard,
Mm,
and I didn't know it was. I had to I had to employ several methods before I found what made me feel the best to get over my grief. I've lost parents and sisters, and that's sad. But when you lose your other half, that's like ripping your heart out of your chest. And just when you think it's scabbing over and that wound is starting to heal, something sets it all off again. I call
mm,
them the landmines. You might pass a restaurant that you used to go to, or a TV show, or especially a song on the radio. Holy crap. I couldn't even listen to the radio because every song
mm,
seemed like it was about Melinda.
yeah.
And yeah, that one was a tough one. And that's what made me decide to write a book about grief because I wanted to end my life. I wanted to either turn
Mm,
to alcohol, and I didn't even know about alcohol. I wanted to. Well, I looked for any form of relief I could find, and that's when I realized that I need to write this down, and I need to write something down that's going to help other people. And
yeah.
so, 5 years later, when I felt like I could, that's when I began to write.
Yeah. I remember you talking about the first time that I heard you tell the story of dealing with the grief of her death. I remember you talking about the funeral being the easy part. I remember you saying, because this resonated with me, it was going home and it was after everyone left your home and being alone in that space. That was the hardest part. It's fairly obvious that we're going to feel grief when we lose a loved one, especially one that's close to us. But we can feel grief over such a huge range of different things. And I think that's the important point that I want to dig into today. What resonated with me about your funeral story, being in the empty house afterwards, was when I got divorced and I had been married for 22 years and I had been a mother for 23, almost 23 years. And my whole life was consumed with caring for my children, caring for my home, and being with my former spouse. And when I went to the apartment for the first time, when it was my former spouse's turn to have the kids for the week, and I went to the apartment and it was completely empty, I have never felt more of a hollow feeling than I did that night. And the title of your book really resonated with me, Feeling Empty, because that's what it was. It was this empty feeling of, who even am I if I don't have my kids to care for and my home to take care of and my spouse to take care of.
That's a good point, Megan, that divorce, death, it doesn't necessarily have to be death to cause grief.
Right.
Divorce is a huge form of grief. And in some ways, I believe that it's even a little more difficult because with losing your spouse, you're not gonna see him again. They're gone. There's no way to see him again. With a
Yeah.
divorce, that you that feeling of emptiness is there. And to add to it, there's this feeling that what are they doing right now? And you could see them again, but you can't, if that
Right.
makes sense. You can't be with them anymore. And in a way, I think that even can be more difficult than losing someone to death.
Right. And that leads me to sort of other types of complicated grief. And for those who don't know, Lori Vallow is my cousin. She was convicted of killing her children and her new husband's former wife, and her brother was implicated in those deaths as well. And there are a couple of complicated things about that. One is I'm glad that Alex is dead, but I grieve who he was. And Lori's not dead, but I have to grieve her as well because, in a sense, she is dead to me. She is a version of a person that I don't know anymore. That psychopathic trait that has crept in makes her unrecognizable in some ways, but she still looks and talks and acts a lot like the Lori that I knew. And I've heard Colby comment, her only living child. It's so difficult to grieve someone who is still walking around, living and breathing.
Exactly. Yeah. Like in divorce. And you lost a family member. You lost a friend, um, because they moved on to something completely bizarre and committed crimes, and boom, that's another form of grief. Yeah, absolutely. I'm sorry that you've had to go through that, and I'm sorry that you had to pass through that grief of going through a divorce, because I understand how tough that is.
Yeah. And I think for a lot of people, especially in divorce, there's a lot of anger that comes up, and anger is a healthy emotion that needs to be expressed in healthy ways. It's not shameful to feel anger. It's perfectly reasonable to feel anger, even when someone passes away unexpectedly, to be angry about those circumstances. But sometimes I think people focus so much on the anger in divorce situations that they forget to acknowledge that there is grief and that two things can be true at the same time. You can feel betrayed by someone and angry at them and still grieve their presence in your life. And for me, having to acknowledge the grief of an unrealized future.
Right? Yeah. Yeah, everything changes there with both death and divorce.
Mhm.
There's a whole new normal that you have to finally acclimate to. Uh,
Mhm.
when I lost, it's weird. There's so many forms of grief, like you mentioned. When I lost my mom and my dad and so many family members, I was sad. But I don't know, it just almost seemed a little more natural. They were older than I was, and I kind of expected it, and I I really held held my composure quite well. I cried a little at the funeral, but man, when I lost Melinda, it it was devastating. I also went through a divorce before I was married to Melinda, and I can empathize with you about that. I suddenly you're in an empty house, and your ex-wife and kids are off doing something, having family fun, and I'm alone. And
Yeah.
yeah, that really, really hurt as well. So I understand what you're talking about.
Yeah, I used to refer to healing from trauma as peeling back all these layers of the onion and trying to get to the center of it. And I was listening to a podcast with Dr. Richard Swartz, who has a book called No Bad Parts. And he talks about all the different aspects of our personality and how they're all valid, welcome parts, and we need to acknowledge them all. He referred to um, healing from trauma as a head of garlic. And I think of grief now the same way, because it's not just a layer, it's not just layers of one thing. It's so many different things and so many different types of grief that you have to go through, that I think sometimes we we want things to be simple, happy, sad, you know,
Right.
and grief goes under that. But it's not until you dig through all of the different types of grief, I think, and acknowledge each one of them, that you really begin to heal.
That's absolutely right. Grief is not a condition. It's a journey.
Mm,
And nobody can tell someone who's grieving when they should be done grieving. I
right.
Yeah, I have a dear friend who lost her husband. Oh, it's been 25 years ago, and she's still in a deep grief. Um, no one can tell you that, hey, buck up and start your life and quit moping around. It's such a personal thing. I know people who have lost loved ones who they were incredibly close to, but they were back at work the next week. And it was just, something they had to deal with. Everyone deals with it in a different way. You know, well, when I lost Melinda, um, I started walking the Mesa Cemetery in Mesa, Arizona. It's a large cemetery. And I walked that cemetery looking at headstones, seeing couples who had lost, you could tell when there was a couple and one of them had passed away because there wasn't a date on the husband's part. And I sought out these couples who all I wanted to do was talk to someone who knew what I was going through. The counselors, the first thing, I tried some grief counselors, and first thing ask is, have you ever lost a spouse? And if they said no, I didn't want to continue. I literally took some names down in the cemetery and researched them and called them and just
Mm,
asked if I could talk to them because I felt like I had to speak to someone who understood what I was going through. I wanted to make sure I wasn't the only one
yeah.
because I felt so lonely in that aspect. I felt like I was the only person feeling what I was feeling. And it forced me to start walking the cemetery to make sure that I'm not the only guy. And there had to be others out there that were experiencing such pain. And luckily
Yeah.
I found a group support of people who had lost spouses, and it was put on by hospice.
Mm,
That was I couldn't it was every 2 weeks, and I just couldn't hardly wait for the next 2 weeks to, uh, to get back to that group because that's where I felt the most comfortable. They understood what I was going through. No one else could. We called it a special club we were in, and, you know, misery loves company, right?
well, I think it's more than that. I think we do, as human beings, we crave shared experience. And it's just as you say, we can talk about grief and we can talk about losing loved ones, but until you lose a spouse, there's nobody understands what that's like unless they've been through that specific thing. And I felt the same way about my family's losses in this crime spree. um, I had to speak with, my therapist is an excellent therapist. He's a specialist in EMDR, and he has done wonderful, wonderful work with me. But I couldn't really talk to him that much about going through losing family members to crime. When someone that you know and love kills someone that you know and love, that's a completely separate other thing. I had to speak with a forensic psychologist to really feel like someone understood, because they have that proximity to these circumstances all the time. And that was really healing as well, was to be able to speak with someone who understands what family members go through when these types of
Oh,
things happen.
I can't imagine, everybody who's got family members who have been mass murderers, raise your hand, That's a really small club and probably very difficult to navigate. Yeah.
Yes, but I'll also say I went and attended jury selection in Lori's trial for Charles Vallow's murder. And I was there for the in-person voir dire of the large jury group, and there were probably, about 80 people in the room. And one of the questions that the judge asked was, how many of you have an immediate family member or a close family friend who has been incarcerated for a violent crime? And I'm not kidding you, it was probably about 45% of the people in the room, which completely shocked me
Wow.
that
Well, there
that
goes my
many
theory,
people. Yeah,
right?
that many. Well, I to say not to say that they had all murdered someone, but they had family members who did serve prison time for violent crime, and they asked each of these jurors, what were the circumstances, and some of it was domestic violence, and some of it was, a bar fight or an assault of some kind. But honestly, it really made me feel less alone, because I thought for such a long time that, like you're saying, that it's a very, very small group of people, but it's more common than we would think, I guess. And that was what I took away from that, was that a lot of people have experienced something similar to this in their lives, where a loved one or a close family member was incarcerated for something violent,
Right. I it was such a learning experience for me walking the cemetery. I always guess in my mind, I always figured that the cemetery was full of old people who
Mm,
died of old
yeah,
age. That is so far from the truth. Take a walk in your cemetery sometime. Start looking at the dates and the number of people that died young. It's just unfathomable. Old age, people are lucky if they, make it to old age with all of the maladies and sicknesses and things. There are so many people who die young. And like you said, so many people who are incarcerated that you never imagined. It's like, wow, I am not alone. When I wrote Feeling Empty, my 3 points were, first of all, first and foremost, you're not alone. There's millions of people going through this same experience. The second one was that even though they didn't feel like it, there was and will be truly a light at the end of the tunnel. You feel like you'll never be happy again, but they will. And then the third one is your loved ones don't go nearly as far as you think they do. They are with you. I'm telling you, I could feel Melinda on several occasions. I just knew she was there. And I know for a fact that she's responsible for getting me together with my fiance now. She knew what my taste was, what I liked, and the way it came together, it had to be Melinda saying, "Baby, I'm taking care of you." I always I always told Melinda through the 6 months that she was so sick in the hospital. I told her over and over again, and I meant it, that if I could take the pain away, if I could just take the pain from her, I would. If I could take her disease, I would be the one suffering. Well, she passed away, and then it was my turn. I did take that pain away, and the pain transferred right over to me.
yeah,
And so we both suffered through her illness and death.
yeah, yeah. It's such a complicated thing. And you mentioned earlier that you can't really tell anybody when it's time to stop grieving. And I honestly don't think that grief ever leaves us, because we do get these constant reminders of, you know, the person that we loved, or the future that we wanted to have, things like that. I will tell you, my cousin Stacy died under strange circumstances, and my cousin Alex and I were there when we found her there unresponsive. And I drive past the building where she died in hospice every single day, sometimes multiple times a day. And they've turned it into a furniture warehouse now. So it has all these ridiculous banners all over it, and one of those tubes that floats up and down with the guy, calling attention to it. And but every time I pass by it, it doesn't look anything the same as the building that it did in 1998 when she passed away. But I never pass it without thinking of her. And I don't feel sadness every time, but I get the little flicker of her face in my mind, and some of those circumstances come back to me. And I don't feel sad and horrible every single time, but sometimes I do. And
Oh, yeah.
sometimes it's like a fond memory of the smile on her face, and other times it's that deep sadness of the way in which she passed, and all of the unresolved conversations and everything that comes back. So I think grief is not something that ever leaves us.
It doesn't go away. It just gets further away.
Mm,
And those landmines lose their explosive powers. It's just turns into more of a little pop underneath your feet. But
yeah.
I was angry. When I lost Melinda, I was pissed off. I I remember going to the store. There was a grocery store across the street from the hospital there in Mesa, Arizona. And I would go over there and I'd get her whatever she could eat, whatever she could, uh, you know, if she had any appetite at all. I'd ask her, "What do you think you could eat?" And I'd go get it. And I remember, I don't know if I was madder at God or if I was madder at all of the men who were married who hadn't lost their wives. Because I'd go to this grocery store and I'd see a husband and wife together, and it just infuriated me. I remember thinking to myself, how can I be so mad? I tried to go to church after Melinda passed, and I'd see these couples holding hands and, tickling each other's back and loving on each other, and I couldn't stand it. I couldn't even drive by the hospital where she passed away, like you mentioned, and the hospice center. I would drive out of my way, miles out of my way, to go around that hospital so I didn't have to go by it and see it. And the hospice center, forget about it. I would I wouldn't even look the direction because it was by a hospital with a great big dome on it that you could see, from all around, kind of like a Mormon temple, you could see it from everywhere. I wouldn't even look that direction, and I would do everything I could not to even go near that. And same with certain restaurants, certain things, I would avoid them on purpose. I would do anything to not have to go by there. But eventually, I was able to go by. And, I feel like people are not healed from their grief, but they're able to accept it better once they can think about their loved one and smile and be thankful for the opportunity you had to be with them rather than cry and get angry that they're gone.
Yeah.
That's when I think, and that's what I had to wait for before I started writing about it.
Mm,
I,
yeah.
I if I had tears dripping out of my eyes as I'm writing, I knew I wasn't ready to write about being healed from grief or
Mm,
lessening grief. I couldn't do that if I wasn't there myself. And it took a while. Took a while.
yeah. I'm sure. Yeah. So you talk about three main things in your book, and we've been over one of them. Can you take us through the other two?
Yeah, the first one being you're not alone. The second one being there's happiness at the end of the tunnel. Um, I found for me, um, for months, I went to the cemetery every day, no longer walking, looking at dates and things, but just sitting at her grave. It was therapeutic for me. And I know that, her spirit probably wasn't anywhere around there. I never felt like she was sitting next to me at her grave. Yeah, but it was therapeutic for me to go to the cemetery and sit and watch other people visit graves because that helped me know that because I'd watch them, they'd have balloons and a lot of them were laughing and they'd have like little picnics there. And it's like, maybe I can be happy. I It was one of my friends who had lost her husband that told me about she felt like her heart was ripped out of her chest.
Mm.
And she was the one that provided that comparison to just as it's getting better, you think you're starting to heal, that scab gets ripped off again and it all starts over.
Yeah.
But eventually the scab doesn't rip off. And for me, going out and finding another girl to date seemed to be therapeutic. It's like I felt like I had to replace Melinda.
Mm.
And I learned that there's no replacing the one you love. They're them, and you'll never find anyone the same.
Yeah.
But it was consoling to me to be with another woman to feel like I had some kind of loving companionship. But I didn't I I went through a lot of crazy experiences seeking that.
Mm.
Then it finally dawned on me, look, live your life because you're not going to find anyone who's going to come close to Melinda. But I
Yeah.
was so blessed to, you know, a decade afterwards come across someone who had the qualities of Melinda and who I just loved dearly. And like I said, I know that Melinda knew this and guided me to her because she wanted me to be happy. When our loved ones pass away, and we'll get into my research and starting with the funeral home and everything. Sometimes we're not thinking straight, and I ended up in a relationship about 3 years after Melinda passed. That she seemed nice and sweet and kind and all that, and she love bombed me and drew me in. But every time I started to talk about my late wife, and I tried not to, but I'm still grieving and healing.
Right.
She'd get angry. And I heard her talking to her mother. She didn't know I could hear. And she was saying, this is ridiculous. Uh, try having a boyfriend that has lost his wife. She said, I don't want to hear about it. She wouldn't
Mm.
let me hang any pictures up of well, we ended up moving in together, and, she moved into my home, and she didn't want any pictures up of Melinda. She didn't want any memories, and that's when I knew that we were in for a rough time, and that didn't work out,
Yeah.
blah, blah, blah. Amanda, the first thing she did is she put up pictures of Melinda, and she
Mm.
said, "I didn't know her, but I love her.
Mm.
If she was this close to you, I love her,
Yeah.
and I want you to talk about her and tell me about her. I wanna know." That was just the most heartwarming thing in the world, and
That's
that's when I
beautiful.
realized I am gonna be happy. There is happiness at the end of the tunnel, and now I can talk about Melinda, I can go to her grave. Amanda goes with me in Arizona. I live in Spokane, Washington, but every time we're in Arizona, she'll kneel down at the grave and she'll redo the flowers. She'll pick them out, and nothing is more heartwarming to me than seeing that. that she's so kind and loving towards my late wife.
Yeah.
It's like, how can I not be madly in love with Amanda now?
Yeah.
And
That's
I
beautiful.
know for a fact that our our deceased loved ones don't want us to be unhappy. That's the last thing they want, is to see us grieving. That's the only thing I think that can cause unhappiness in the life hereafter, whatever it may be, is those souls and spirits feeling the grief that we're feeling and the unhappiness. They don't want that. There's no jealousy anymore. There's no possessiveness. We tend to feel guilty when we're grieving. We tend to
Mm,
feel like, oh, I can't smile. I can't laugh. I can't date anyone because I don't want my loved one up there being jealous or mad or angry. I can't do this. I can't do that. That's, you know what? They don't care. All
mm,
they care about is that we're happy, that we are continuing on with our life. And like I
yeah.
said, I know that that's the case with my current Amanda, that Melinda can go on with her spiritual life, whatever they do, whatever it is, knowing that I'm happy. And
Yeah.
I'm so grateful for that. That's the happiness at the end of the tunnel. Like I said, it takes some people a whole lot longer. It took long enough for me. And I think it was about 5 years before I could even consider myself happy in life.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's the second thing.
Now, maybe you'll disagree with me, Randy, but you were talking about knowing that you're fully healed when you can think about your loved one who's passed with a smile and with happiness about the time that you spent together. I think for me personally, and maybe, like I said, you can disagree with me, when I know that I'm healed when I get to the point where I can do some dark humor. If I can do dark humor, then I know I'm really healed and there's nothing extraneous left behind after that.
Well, I think that's right in the same category. So I certainly don't disagree with you. If you can, if you can do a little dark humor, then you know that whoever you lost to whatever circumstance, they've got to have a sense of humor. You know,
Yeah.
I I fully agree with you. I lost my parents. I never had a good relationship with my dad. Um, he was physically abusive. He would beat the tar out of me,
Mm,
and it was very difficult to work with him. But I cared for him in the end, and I somehow instinctively knew that I had to, even through his dementia and all of that, I had to keep loving and caring because I didn't want to regret how I treated him when he passed away.
yeah.
I, I have dreams now, so many dreams, that my dad is happy. He's with my mom.
Mm,
They're laughing and smiling. I never saw him laugh and smile when
mm,
when when I was growing up. It was all about work and finances and you know, get out there and do your chores. And there was no, I never saw my parents in a swimsuit or, uh, we never went to the movies or did anything like that. Yeah. But in my dreams, that's what we do. And I
mm,
almost feel like he's trying to reach out to me and tell me, hey, I'm happy now. I'm a happy individual, and I'd see my mom smiling and laughing with him, things I never saw in life. I really feel like he's trying to communicate to me that everything's a-okay.
yeah.
I don't know what it's like when people die. I don't know. I grew up in the LDS church, and I thought I had it down, you know, back when I was a believer. But then when I started doing my research and when I left the church, everything I had learned kind of had to go out the window, and I had to establish my new normal with the church, because there
Mm,
was a little bit of grief there, finding out that I had put in so many years of work and service and went on a mission, gave 2 years of my life, finding out that it was a farce. It wasn't true. Now
yeah,
I don't know what happens when people die, but I do know that they still exist. I've had too many experiences to deny that. I know that there's something, that they're still there, and that when we pass, we'll be able to see them again. I have no doubt about that.
yeah.
But how, in what form we're in, I don't know. What is heaven? Who knows? I just know that we need to enjoy our life here, because we don't know what the hell's going on after we die.
Exactly, exactly. That was one of the things that changed a lot for me too when I left the Mormon church was, I thought that I was so sure. I thought that I knew for sure what was going to happen when this life is over. And now I have absolutely no idea. And
Right?
I've sort of been enjoying my time in this space of I have no idea, because it allows me to entertain other ideas that might be just as valid. And one of the ideas that I ruminate on, I think more frequently lately, is the idea that energy can't be created or destroyed. And it's just as to what you're saying. I think that our spirits probably in some form of energy continue to exist after this. And like you, I've had some of those feelings of being present with energy that feels really familiar to me, that is a person that I loved or something like that. So I have no idea. I could be completely wrong, but that I think is the main thing that changed for me, is that I savor these moments that I love in this life so much, because what if it is the only thing that I get to really experience, you know?
Right? What if we die and there's nothing and we're just gone?
Yeah.
Everything's done.
Yeah.
I don't believe that. I would be a fool to ever think that, because of the experiences that I've had. That's a whole different show. But I, and that's the third point in feeling empty, is that your loved ones haven't gone as far as you think they have.
Yeah.
The feelings, these validations that you talk about, that, hey, they're still around. Hey, this can't be a coincidence. So
Yeah. So true.
I
So
call them
what
love. I'm sorry. I call them love
no, go
notes
ahead.
from heaven. When we get
Mm,
those little signs that, hey, I'm still around. Don't think I've forgotten about you down there or
yeah.
up there, or however the heck it works.
Yeah. So what's the third thing in your
Well,
book?
that's it. Is that
Oh, okay.
our loved ones haven't gone as far as you think they have.
Got it.
So there's happiness at the end of the tunnel, was the second thing,
Yeah.
and third is they're not gone. They're just different now. You know,
Yeah.
I like to compare it to a colony of water beetles under the water. And I tell a story in Filling Empty that every now and then one of these water beetles under the water would climb up this stalk that was in their little community, and they'd go above the water, which was unheard of, and they'd disappear. And people would feel, these little beetles would feel horrible that they've lost one of their community.
Yeah.
One day, this beetle suddenly felt like it was his time to climb the stalk. And he did. He climbed up the stalk, and he came up out of the water, and he crawled onto a lily pad. And when he woke up, he had wings and he could
Mm,
fly. And it was the most glorious sensation, the sunshine that he'd never experienced, this beautiful world. And he wanted to communicate to the rest of his community down under the water, hey, this is amazing. But he was in a different form and he couldn't get down there. But he learned that there's a whole new world, and it was even better than under the water where he'd been living. He
Yeah.
just couldn't fly under the water to let them know. And that's kind of how I feel like, probably our loved ones would love to appear to us in a three-dimensional, you know, form. And sometimes maybe they can. Who knows? Like I said, we don't know. But I'm sure that they would love to be able to communicate to us exactly what they're going through and how glorious it is. And hey, we're making a home for you here. So come on up when you're ready to climb that stalk.
That sounds like it would be an amazing children's book for you to write to help children understand
Well,
passing on to
yeah,
the other
not a
side.
bad idea. Yeah, absolutely. I've always been well, not always, but um, after Melinda passed away, someone had read some things that I wrote about it, and um, I think through social media they saw that I was able to write, and I had written for Walt Disney. Aside from being the detective for Walt Disney and the resort manager, I also for human resources, I would write training syllabuses.
Hmm.
And I wrote a couple of creative videos that I did with Disney, and I ended up writing for different companies, FedEx, the Pepsi company, and Forbes magazine, and blah blah blah. So I kind of became a writer. That's what I decided I was going to be when I grew up. I was going to be a writer, and I have been ever since. But I found that it's cathartic, to say the least, to write our experiences down through grief, through happiness, whatever. Write them down, and that to me is a big comfort. Um, but here a few years ago, I I was I was just nudged out of my. I was editor in chief of a large marketing firm and wrote for all kinds of companies. And um, to be honest, the technology just passed me by. I
Hmm.
mean, programmatic advertising came in, and I ended up writing about that. But you had all these young people graduating from college, having learned the new technical forms of writing and communicating that, and it just nudged me right out of the job.
Hmm.
And it was it was such a relief not to have the burden of having to have so many articles done, and plus I'm checking the work of all the others. But I also learned that I didn't have any money. Unfortunately, my company didn't come with a golden parachute, and there was no there was no light at the end of that company tunnel. And I realized that the money that I had just didn't go that far. And I thought, what can I do that will help me in my research to write? And I thought, I wonder if I could go to work for a funeral home. And I thought about that for about a year and a half. I just thought about it. And I thought, no, do I really want another job, or do I want to just make a living with my writing? Well, it's hard to make a living with your writing, to be honest, if you
Yep.
don't have a steady employer.
Yep.
And so I went to some of the job seeking sites, and long story short, I went to an interview and at a funeral home. I didn't know anything about what positions there were. I think my interview was to be a transport driver to go collect the deceased and bring them to the funeral home. I got to tell you, the one thing that kept me from jumping on it right away was that my phobia has always been dead bodies.
Hmm.
And my biggest fear in life has always been being in a funeral home.
Really?
Well, and after I lost Melinda, I was certainly not afraid of that dead body. So I had to seek out a therapist, and I found an incredible therapist, Antonia, who helped me. I talked to her about the fear that I had of bodies, and she helped me and listened to me and helped me understand maybe why I was afraid of them. And I won't go into all that, but I was, you know, from the time I was 12 years old and went to my first funeral, I was petrified. So working at a funeral home was such a ridiculous thought, but I just felt like I kind of had to do that. And I had to overcome that fear. Most of all, I wanted to learn about grief and I wanted to help people through it. And so I went and interviewed, and I think the position was to go get the bodies and bring them back to the funeral home. And, it could be 2 in the morning and you're the only one, and you have to take them in and weigh them and do all that. And it's like, okay, that doesn't thrill me, but I have to do what I have to do to work my way up to be able to talk to people instead of working directly with the dead bodies. But after the interview, she said, "You know what? I'm not going to waste you on picking up dead bodies. I would like you to be an attendant, a funeral attendant." So I started as that, and I was able to talk to people and comfort them. People would come in and uh, you know they'd be crying their eyes out just there in the lobby, and I'd sit down and put my arm around them and let them know that I completely understand how painful grief can be.
Mm.
I learned that there's a few things you don't want to say to people. You don't want to say, "I know what you're going through," because no one knows what they're going through. No, I hated it. When I lost Melinda, when people would come and say, "Oh, I know what you're going through.
Or I
I
know how
lost,
you feel.
yeah, I know how you feel. I lost my great aunt and I loved her so much." And I'm thinking, you know what? Go pound sand. I don't want to hear about who you lost. You didn't
Yeah.
lose Melinda. Or another
Mm.
thing that would
Yeah.
really tick me off is when they'd say, "You know what? She's in a better place." And I'm like, "How the hell do you know where she's at and what she's doing? Don't tell me
Right.
she's in a better place. The place she needs to be is right here with me."
Yeah.
She always depended on me to fix things, but I couldn't fix her cancer.
Mhm. Yeah.
Or if they say, um, uh, "God must have wanted her to do work up there." Whatever. People don't die in the hospital because God wants them to die. They get
Right.
sick and they die. That whole bit about, "Oh, Heavenly Father's calling her up because he needs more missionaries up there." Don't say that to people because it means nothing to them. It just makes them mad.
Right.
And so I implemented all of this knowledge at the funeral home, and I would sit and I would talk to them and felt like I could make a difference in their grief. And that's my whole purpose of writing the book, of talking with people, doing podcasts about grief, is I want people to know they'll be happy again, even though they don't feel like they will.
Mhm.
And that's the most important thing is, yes, this is so difficult. This is so hard. And I understand how painful it is. I don't say I understand what you're going through, but I know how painful it is. And
Yeah.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry. That's what they need to hear. What
Yeah.
can I do to help you? That's what they need to hear. How can
Yeah.
I how can I best help you get through this? Now when I have friends who lose people, those are the kinds of things I say. "Do we want to chat? Call me. Here's my number. I've been through death, before, losing
Yeah.
people, and I'm happy to talk to you about it." That's all they want.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the funeral home was an incredible experience, and I got to see grief from every angle there is. Um, Suicides,
Mm,
so many suicides, accidents, homicides. So many of these people, like I said, dying young before they should have died. You know,
mhm.
when they die young, they're dying before their time.
Yeah.
And it was an exercise in empathy and sympathy. And that's what the people needed. You know, their little boy, their little 12-year-old who's lying in that casket, they don't want to hear that he's in a better place. They don't
No.
want to hear that God called him home. No, God didn't call him. He
Yeah.
got shot. So yeah, the funeral home experience was priceless for my research and grief and for being able to help people and listening to their stories. And now I'm currently working on a book that's just about ready to publish of people's experiences after they've lost their loved ones, experiences that they feel was assigned from above or
Mm,
beside them or wherever they are. And I'm hoping that that book will especially help people. In
yeah.
Feeling Empty, there's a chapter, I think 11 or 12, that is love notes from heaven, like I said. And that's what everyone gloms onto. That's the chapter that they want to hear about because that says, hey, they're still around. There's signs everywhere. That's what they wanted. So in response to so many letters and requests, that's now the book that's going to be published is they haven't gone that far. They're still around in one form or another. Who knows?
I'm excited for that because I think that is going to help people as well. Because, regardless of what you believe, and I think there probably are a lot of people out there who want to believe in an afterlife but just aren't sure. I think those little reassurances, whether we're right or wrong about what the next life looks like, I think those little reassurances bring us comfort that is needed. And it's okay to believe in something like that, even if you're not really sure if it's true or not.
Right? All these TV shows you see about ghost hunters and paranormal caught on camera and all that.
Yeah.
It's really intriguing to me because sure as heck they do catch a lot of stuff on film.
Yeah.
There's a lot of entities and spirits. I've seen tons of them myself. Some form of spiritual activity that they catch in a lot of these shows, and some of it's malevolent, and some of it is very warm benevolence that they feel. And um, the evil stuff, no matter what your belief, if you're into the paranormal investigations, you'll find that there's negative energy or evil energy, and then there's warm energy that and it's kind of the dark side versus the light side. And no matter what your belief, people can say, oh, there's no such thing. But hey, watch a few of these shows and you'll be kind of shocked at what they catch on video and surveillance cameras and things. It's it's kind of fun for me because it's a validation of what I believe. I've got a I've got a good friend who comes over and that's our whole evening. He'll come over and we'll sit on my back deck and smoke a cigar and watch these videos, these paranormal videos. We call it Smokes and Spooks Night, where he'll come over and we'll smoke a cigar and watch these videos. And it's very validating.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
There's a channel that I like called Web Sleuths, and they mostly do true crime, but they have what they call Woo Woo Saturday Night, and they have people come on and tell their paranormal experiences or their woo woo experiences. And I think there is some validity to that. Now, I we can cut this out, but isn't a lot of Garrett's work that he does with spooky, scary kind of things, or
Yeah,
is that just a
absolutely. And
okay?
and you sure don't need to cut it out. But yeah, Garrett, he has a channel called and for those who are listening, Garrett is my son, Garrett Watts. He is a YouTube star. And he has Garrett Unhinged channel where he does funny, goofy videos. He's just got a fun sense of humor. But then when he does his long form videos, he'll go explore abandoned mental hospitals or, prisons, all these things where hospitals where people have died, passed away. And some of the things that he's caught are amazing. Now, he recently did something very interesting. The Walt Disney Company allowed him to come in after hours and do a video from the Haunted Mansion. Not that he expected to find ghosts in there. Not a lot of people die at Walt Disney World, but that was
According to the
a
records,
fun.
none do, right?
Exactly, not on record. But yeah, he does these haunted places that are just incredible. Some of the things that he gets, and it's like, holy crap. He's not one that will go in alone. He has a cameraman that goes with him. And I don't think I would want to go into some of these places alone. I see people that
Yeah.
do, but forget that. I got to have even if it's my Chihuahua, you know.
Gotta have a buddy.
I had enough experiences at the funeral home where I was always the last guy, and that was part of my job, is closing up the funeral home. So I had to walk around this big, excuse my French, but this big scary ass funeral home here in here in Spokane, Washington. It's yeah, that's scary as crap. I can't imagine going into an old abandoned hospital alone. I got to have someone with me. Like I said, even if it's
Yeah.
my little Chihuahua. Otherwise, yeah, I'm a chicken.
It might actually be an interesting experiment for Garrett to go through this furniture warehouse that used to be a hospice center. I wonder what is still lingering around
Oh,
in that
well, yeah.
area.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He recently went to Florida um, in a lighthouse that's purported to be haunted. And that was incredibly intriguing. He somehow gets these people to let him go in after hours, and they'll give him the keys. He went to the Winchester Mansion in
Oh,
California,
goodness.
and they gave him the keys and allowed him to spend the night there. And he goes to
Wow.
all these places, and the things that he catches, it's like you can't. Garrett and I have the same gift when it comes to feeling the presence of spirits. He'll be able to feel when they're there, and he catches a lot of crazy things. But
I bet.
it's Garrett's channel and all these others. It's a validation for me that there's something, and they do
Yeah.
take the form of humans. And
Yeah.
I listen. I've got a list of people I want to haunt after I die. If that's if that's how it works, I'm ready because I'm making
Oh,
a list.
man. That just made me this thought just popped into my mind. If they're still around after I'm gone, oh, I'm coming back.
Yeah, Katie, bar the doors because I can go through walls now.
Yeah. Can I be just a little bit self-indulgent for a moment? When we were having the conversation about what not to say to people who are grieving, a pet peeve of mine, whenever I was going through something difficult and I was in the Mormon church, people would say to me, "Well, let me know if you need anything." And I always think that is the worst thing to say to somebody who is going through a difficult time, especially a grief or a loss. And what I like to say to people now is, you may not know what you need right now, but I'm happy to do something for you when you do figure out what you need. And the other thing that I learned, I had a dear close friend who lost a baby. And of course, there was a lot of grief throughout the entire family. And I had no idea what to do or what to say. It was a circumstance, the unique circumstances of that were something that I had never been through before. And I didn't know what they needed or wanted or anything, but I knew that they were keto, and I had a particular keto bean dip recipe that I really loved. And
Oh,
so I just made some bean dip and just showed up at their house and I said, I have no idea what you need. And I'm sure you probably don't need this, but it's something that I love and I'm going to share it with you. And they appreciated that. Just, you know,
you
they didn't
you
need
get
more
it.
food.
You get it, Megan. And that's just an amazing uh, token of your kindness for them. And I know that they had to appreciate that. Even if even if they never took a bite of the bean dip, you were thinking about them and
Yeah.
you were doing what you could to help them in such a traumatic, agonizing time.
Yeah. I think they did appreciate it. But I think what more than that, what I learned for myself, it's always been hard for me to ask for exactly what I need. And so for people that I'm really close with, I try to encourage them to say the thing out loud that you're afraid to say. Because we all do, I think we all do inherently know exactly what we need in order to heal. But sometimes we're afraid to say it. And so I like to encourage people, just say the thing out loud, even if you think it's ridiculous, and let's see what we can do about it.
Well, that's a beautiful thing right there. And I know what you mean about people saying, "Hey, let me know if I can help you." Yeah, like they're going to get on the phone in a couple of days in their agonizing grief and say, "Yeah, you told me to let you know. I think I'd like some keto bean dip." You know, you were there for them, and that's just a such a kind thing to do, and it lets them know that hey, you really are willing to help out in any way that they might need. Because you're not going to let them know. You're not going to call.
Yeah.
Ask them on the spot. What can I do? What can I do to help you?
Yeah.
Doesn't matter what the answer is. I'll do it.
Yeah. It's such a tricky thing to navigate because so many people, don't really know what they need, and I don't want to be pushy and take them through a bunch. Well, do you need your dishes done? Do you need your lawn mowed? Do you need errands run? That kind of thing. I think showing up is important. Just whatever that means to you.
One of my sons, Andrew, um, he has such a kind. Well, all my sons have a kind spirit, but Andrew's just as Melinda was starting to go in and out of consciousness, and we knew that the end was on its way. Andrew said, "Dad, we know what's about to happen. What can I do?" And I said, "Well, Melinda's dying wish was to hold a baby bulldog, a baby English
Oh.
bulldog, because she loved English bulldogs. And she had two of them. One of them passed away while she was in the hospital.
Mm,
And that's all she wanted. And I, Andrew, all I had to do was say, I wish that I could break away from here and go find a baby bulldog, but how does that happen?
yeah.
And within a couple of hours, Andrew had a baby bulldog at that hospital
Mm,
and placed it in her hands. And that was one of the last things that she was aware of and felt was that little baby bulldog. And the smile came on her face. And I will never be able to repay Andrew. Well, I'm sorry. I don't mean to get emotional,
don't ever
but
apologize.
I'll never be able to repay Andrew for the joy that he brought to Melinda.
Yeah.
And and there were other extreme signs of kindness by my kids. My son Randy Tyler was in the Navy, and he trained the Navy SEALs, and he was a pretty big deal. And he's the one that took me into the viewing of Melinda, and um, he showed up in full Navy dress, you know, and escorted me into that viewing room with just him and I, and kept his hand on me that just lent me the strength to get through that.
Hmm.
My son, Garrett, was making videos and putting music to them and selecting songs that Melinda loved. And yeah, that's what makes me emotional still is the love that my sons showed during that tough time.
Yeah.
My daughter Marianne would be the same way, but she was in Memphis, Tennessee having a baby, so I can't blame her for not being there. But I know that she would have been if she could have. But it's those things that you're talking about, Megan, going out of your way to help people in their grieving time.
The
I
small
never thought
kindnesses.
I never thought I'd get emotional, but I'm sorry. It just happens.
I'm a big proponent of feeling what you're feeling in the moment and normalizing showing emotion. And I just please don't ever apologize for it because it's beautiful and it's human and other humans need to see it.
Well, that's what I tell the people that are grieving. Don't feel bad about crying, but I always do, especially when it's on a podcast that's going to be viewed by the world.
Well, not the whole world. It's my little tiny corner of the world. And my tiny corner of the world is very used to seeing tears on this podcast. I'm a crier. And like I said, I believe in normalizing it. So people see it all the time here. And I think it's beautiful.
Yeah. Well, I think the expressions of love, and you can see that now in my emotion, are what we remember. And
Yeah.
and they'll carry that gratitude for the rest of their lives and remember what was done.
Yeah.
So
I think
that's
that's true.
awesome that you're willing to find out what, or just make an effort to give them something or do something for them. They truly appreciate that.
Yeah, I think so too. Well, it couldn't be an episode about grief without tears. So
Right?
I just think that's a great place to end it, Randy. Thank you so much for being here and for sharing your heart with us. And I appreciate it so much.
Well, I so appreciate the opportunity that you've given me to let me talk about grief, and hopefully it'll help those who are hurting right now. And I guarantee you that there's people listening right now that are feeling the pangs of grief. And hopefully it'll be a small comfort to them to know that they're not alone.
Yeah, exactly. And I hope people out there will share this with someone that you know and love who needs help with the grieving process, or if they're feeling grief or you know that they're having a hard time, share it with them and hopefully it'll bring them some comfort.
Wonderful.
Thanks again, Randy.
Thank you, Megan.